for life.
Paprium's just leaked, and it's a real problem for 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗲. Not all game development teams are equal. Some are masters of their craft and release multiple hits, while others struggle to even get them out the door. 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗲 is possibly the latter, and they have a big problem with their latest game, Paprium. I was in the middle of filming this video, which was going to highlight all the major problems that 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗲 face because of their development time and the comms with their community. One of the big risks I was going to talk about was the longer it takes them, the more likely it is that the community will figure out how to emulate the game themselves. And that's exactly what they've done. You no longer need to wait to buy Paprium or pay out over £1,000 for the game on eBay because it can now be emulated. Now I will put a link to the Twitter post that allows you to download the emulator and the ROM in the description below. But I also want to talk about how much of a disaster this is, and in general how 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗏 have missed out on a massive opportunity. But first, let's play some Paprium.
Easy, hard, very hard. Showtime! Yes!
Paprium is a stunning game, and this makes the situation surrounding the game even more disappointing. Now I want to make it clear that this is not a witch hunt. The people who are involved in this game and with this company are not the devil. They've made some mistakes, and it's these mistakes we're going to look at. And what are the possible consequences of these mistakes? I think it's also obvious that we should support the independent development community by acquiring the games legally. This helps them with future projects and supports them and their families. Saying that though, I feel justified playing Paprium today, given that I paid 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 over £500 and I've seen nothing. As soon as I get my official copies of the game, I'll gladly delete the ROM. Now I want to give you some quick context of my background so that when you listen to the points we're going to discuss today, you know that they come from someone who's experienced and qualified. So I'm a games developer. I've been in the development industry for over 25 years. I've worked at PlayStation, Xbox, 2K, with a Ubisoft partner studio. I created the PlayStation trophy system. I worked on games like 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗲𝗏𝗏, SingStar, For Honor, Mafia, and PlayStation Home. More recently, I've taken a sidestep from AAA to work with classic and retro games. And my latest project, Xbox Retro Classics, recently just passed 1 million players in less than a month. I know what it takes to develop and ship games, and I've made mistakes, and I've seen teams make mistakes. So let's discuss the mistakes of 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗏 and Paprium. Back in the 90s, when the games audiences started to grow exponentially, the channels teams could use to tell their audience about the product also started to grow. You had the traditional game print press, there were international and national expos, the internet was gaining traction, and with it developers and publishers could talk directly to fans through websites and forums. It's here where we really started to mess up with communication at scale. Teams and publishers would announce games early at expos on their forums and websites, driving up interest in the games early. This was fantastic. We could build audiences and fans of our games early, growing our potential sales numbers over time. Some developers were absolute ninjas at this and continued to build up the hype and support for their games by bringing the players along for the journey, through the highs and the lows. Others did a terrible job and would announce their game years before release and then would go quiet, which frustrated players and shrunk their player support base. As we moved into the noughties, developers had even more tools with social media and learnt the lessons of not communicating with their audience. Most of us did anyway. Enter 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏. To say that 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏's communication with its community has been poor is an understatement. It's for the most part been non-existent. What exacerbates the lack of communication is that their players have paid upfront for the games, essentially becoming the studio's investors. The player base has grown frustrated and built up resentment for the studio as communication blackout continued even after the initial physical release of the game. Games can take a long time to make. Great teams figure out how to reduce this time, but it still takes time. And if you're going to market and selling your game early, you owe it to your players to take them on the journey. If it's done well, they'll be your biggest supporters, even when things go bad. Do it like 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 and you risk your entire studio, its IP and brand. And that's exactly what happened here. 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 has burnt its player base in quite a spectacular way. Support for their games has dropped away and they have lost the trust that could have been used to sell their next game. So the business model of selling consecutive games is damaged. Even worse for 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏, this damage is public and generates more noise than their games do. Because of my experience, I often get companies coming to me asking me to consult. I rarely take on consultancy though, as I'm too busy with my own studios and it can conflict with my contract. In early 2024, two big indie publishers came to me and asked if I would help negotiate a potential acquisition of 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏. Both companies were talking about a multi-million-dollar acquisition. I had to decline due to my contract though. One of the publishers did get back to me several months later to let me know that they wouldn't continue, and they pulled this exact point up as the reason why. They didn't believe that the company could recover the players they'd lost, and felt that the 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 brand had been terminally harmed, not by the time taken to develop the game, but by the studio's comms strategy. They couldn't understand why a team that had access to so many tools with such good IP would burn its player base. And so 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏's approach to communication, to player communication, has been a costly mistake in my opinion. It can take a long time to create a game. It can be a hard process, and not all game development teams are equal. The best teams know how to scope a project to ensure that it can be built on time, to budget, and with quality. These teams then often get the chance to do it again and again and again. But like I said, not all teams are equal. Indie teams often lack the funds and so need to have a slow burn on their project, which means waiting longer for the game. They often also rely on players to help fund the development and so announce and even take payment for the game early. Now, we've discussed already the importance of comms if you do this, but 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 finds itself in a unique position. They've already released the game and made the sensible decision to bring the game to modern consoles. This was the correct choice, and I'd argue that they should have launched with the modern release first and followed up with the retro physical release later. But at least they had the sense to make this decision. They set up a Kickstarter and it was wildly successful. And why wouldn't it have been? They created a great game and most players would not have been aware of the issues for the physical release. And even if they were, the game was done, right? So the risks are less. However, as soon as 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 released the physical version of the game, they were in a race against time, and their modern console Kickstarter compressed that timeline. As soon as the ROM could be dumped, it was only going to be a matter of time before someone figured out how to emulate this game. So it was vital for 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 to get their modern release done and avoid their sales being harmed by piracy. But unfortunately this didn't happen, and now Paprium is spreading through the community like wildfire. This will reduce their chances of earning revenue and selling physical copies of the game. Now, to make the modern version of the game, the team at 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 would have had two potential routes to market. The first is that they could have remade the game in a completely new modern engine. The other route is that they could build a custom emulator and wrap this and the ROM in Unity. It's embarrassing to see that the community has managed to get this emulation route done before the dev team. And now this exists, you could get this game on modern consoles within 2 months, including doing all the reverse engineering for the trophies and achievements and controller remapping. Time is also against the 𝗴𝗺𝗏𝗃 team to support the platforms they sold in their Kickstarter. The PS4 is on the verge of being sunsetted. The first stage of this is for them to stop support for physical and digital new releases. So if you were hoping to get a PS4 copy, it may not be possible if they don't get this game out soon. The Switch 2 is out, and while I'd normally say they have plenty of time to still support their Switch 1 release, you just don't know with this team. The pirated release of Paprium shows us just how bad things must be at 𝗴𝗺𝗏𝗃. They raised nearly $900,000 on Kickstarter, and I know for a fact that this project with a new custom emulator should have taken no longer than a year to make and a $350,000 budget at the most. I suspect project management and production are not a thing at 𝗴𝗺𝗏𝗃, and they're paying for it dearly now. Lastly, we have custom hardware. Now, there's nothing wrong with custom hardware as long as you can repeat the process and have confidence in your supply chain. Creating a game that you can only make in a limited quantity and only once is a dumb idea, unless you're selling each game at $2,000 as a premium item. Now, companies can choose to sell products in limited quantities, which allows them to sell at a higher price or drive demand for their products as people know they're scarce. As we've discussed though, 𝗴𝗺𝗏𝗃 can't do this anymore, as they've likely burned their customer base. So why then would you introduce such a huge risk into your business? The only thing I can think of is that the creative took control of the business. Now, I'm all behind creative endeavors and for people pushing creative boundaries. You do get some stunning games because of it, like Paprium. But someone needed to think about the long-term viability of a custom chipset. It has, in a very real way, hindered their success. Imagine if they could have made another 10,000 copies of the game 2 months after its launch, and wrapped that game in a Unity wrapper and released it on modern consoles 6 months later. 𝗴𝗺𝗏𝗃 could have been extremely successful. Instead though, they made what I would consider as bad decision after bad decision. They've burned their players by ignoring them. They've taken too long to get to market, and now they're undermined by piracy. And they didn't have the foresight to build a game that could scale with demand. It's a real pity. Paprium is an amazing game and an achievement for all those who worked on it. But not all game development teams are equal.